There's a heavy steel drawer beneath my primary workbench that stays locked. Lauren knows better than to ask for the key, and Emma just assumes it's where I keep the dangerous router bits. It's not. It's where I keep a single, green, canvas-bound field log from 10 years ago. Most of the tapes and case files I collect as a stringer sit out on the open shelves. I don't hide the weirdness of Lantern Bend from my family. If you live out in the deep woods, ignorance isn't a shield, it's a liability. But this logbook is different. It's not an interview. It's not a recovered tape from a stranded hiker. It's my own handwriting. In my last broadcast, I briefly mentioned that before I bought this cabin, before I started collecting the stories people are too afraid to take to the sheriff, I was a park ranger. I didn't explain why I left. I spent years navigating deep backcountry, tracking lost hikers, and maintaining trails that most people don't even know exist. When people around Lantern Bend ask why I walked away from a government pension, I usually tell them I got tired of the bureaucracy. I tell them I wanted a quieter life. That's a lie. I quit because of what happened on October 14th, at Firewatch Tower number 7. I haven't opened this green logbook in a decade. But after what happened with the weather radio on my front porch last month, I can't ignore it anymore. The procedures, the hyper-specific rules, the anomalous warnings, it's all connected. So tonight, I'm breaking the seal. I'm going to tell you exactly what I saw in that tower, and why I will never trust a government radio frequency for as long as I live. Tower 7 wasn't a scenic overlook. It was a severe, utilitarian glass box, sitting 80 feet in the air on 4 steel pylons, bolted into the bedrock of a high-altitude ridge. It was a 3-day hike from the nearest paved logging road. When you were up there, you were entirely cut off from the rest of the human race. No cell service, no internet. Just a massive topographical map, a compass, and a heavy, hard-wired VHF radio linked directly to regional dispatch. The isolation is designed to break you down if you aren't ready for it. You spend weeks doing nothing but staring at millions of acres of pine trees, looking for the faintest wisp of gray smoke. The wind howls constantly, vibrating the steel struts so hard your teeth rattle. But I loved it. I loved the physical reality of it. The wind was just wind. The wood was just wood. It was a simple, predictable equation, until the second week of October. It was 2 a.m. I was lying in the narrow cot pressed against the north-facing glass, trying to sleep through a heavy temperature drop. That's when the silence woke me up. If you've never been in a high-altitude forest, you need to understand that it is never truly quiet. There is always the sound of wind shearing through the pines, or the metallic groaning of the tower swaying on its bolts. But suddenly, the ambient noise didn't just fade, it ceased. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, like someone had wrapped the entire glass cabin in layers of thick, wet insulation. I sat up and grabbed my mag light. I shined the beam out the window. The beam didn't penetrate more than 3 feet. A fog had rolled in, but it wasn't weather. Normal fog drifts. It wisps and swirls on the air currents. This stuff was perfectly opaque, thick and gray like dirty wool. And it was rising straight up from the forest floor, swallowing the trunks of the pines, then the canopy, and now it was steadily climbing the steel legs of my tower. It was moving upward with a deliberate, uniform speed, completely ignoring the barometric pressure. I'm a practical guy. I don't jump to conclusions. I checked the weather station mounted on the wall. The humidity sensors were reading normal. The temperature was stable. According to the instruments, the air outside was perfectly clear. But when I put my hand against the cold glass of the window, I couldn't even see the steel catwalk sitting right on the other side of the pane. The fog had completely engulfed the box. I walked over to the center console and picked up the heavy plastic receiver of the VHF radio. I clicked the push-to-talk button. "Dispatch, this is Tower 7. I have an unlogged meteorological event at my coordinates. 0 visibility. Requesting a radar check. Over." The radio hissed. Usually, dispatch responds with the bored, tired voice of a guy working the graveyard shift drinking stale coffee. But the voice that came back through the speaker wasn't bored. It was entirely flat, monotone, like a pilot reading a pre-flight checklist.
Tower 7, this is Regional Dispatch. We copy your transmission. Please confirm your current altitude.
I frowned. The radio was hardlined. They knew exactly where I was and exactly how high the ridge was. "Dispatch, my elevation is 6,400 feet. Again, I have a localized fog bank moving vertically against the wind currents. Are you painting anything on radar? Over." The radio clicked. The static hummed for 3 agonizingly long seconds.
Altitude confirmed. Tower 7, please confirm the structural integrity of your perimeter glass. Are all latches currently in the locked position?
I looked around the tiny 10 by 10 room. A cold knot started to form in my stomach. They weren't checking the weather radar. They were checking the box. "Affirmative, dispatch. All windows are sealed. What is going on? Is there a chemical leak from the logging facility down in the valley? Over."
Negative, Tower 7. There is no chemical leak. Please confirm your resting heart rate.
I froze, my thumb hovering over the transmit button. I stared at the radio console. The thick, gray fog was pressing so hard against the exterior glass, it looked like the windows were painted over. "Dispatch, repeat your last. You want my heart rate? Over."
That is affirmative. Tower 7, please confirm your heart rate, followed by the exact number of teeth currently in your mouth.
I stared at the plastic receiver in my hand. For a split second, my brain tried to process it as a joke. A graveyard shift prank by some bored dispatcher sitting in a basement 50 miles away. But the voice hadn't sounded bored. It didn't have the slight waver or inflection of someone trying not to laugh. It sounded like a machine reading a spreadsheet. "Dispatch, identify yourself. If this is a joke, I'm logging it with the regional director. I have an unidentified mass outside my perimeter and 0 visibility. Cut the shit and give me a radar reading. Over." The static cut out completely. When the voice returned, it was somehow flatter, more hollow.
Tower 7, failure to confirm dental count will result in a compliance penalty. Be advised, the exterior fog is a Class 3 acoustic conductor. Please lower your vocal volume. It can hear you speaking.
I didn't lower my voice. I slammed the receiver down and slammed my hand onto the heavy red emergency lockdown button on the center console. It's a failsafe designed for severe crown fires. When you hit it, hydraulic motors drop half-inch steel storm shutters over every single glass pane in the tower, sealing you inside a fireproof box. The warning klaxon blared, a deafening siren echoing off the glass walls. The hydraulic motors whined to life beneath the floorboards. But the shutters didn't drop.
Tower 7, lockdown override initiated from regional control. The shutters will remain open. The primary subject requires visual confirmation of the anomaly.
Primary subject? I wasn't the observer anymore. I was the bait. I backed away from the console. The klaxon was still screaming. And then, through the thick gray wool of the fog outside the east-facing window, I saw a shape. It was massive. Easily 15 feet tall, suspended in the air right outside the glass, entirely obscured by the gray mist. It didn't have a defined outline. It looked like a cluster of heavy, wet shadows violently shifting and undulating, held together by an unseen membrane. The radio hissed, slicing right through the noise of the alarm.
Tower 7, visual contact established. Please step forward. Place your bare palm directly against the glass, aligned with the entity's center of mass. We need to measure the temperature variance upon contact.
I unholstered my service weapon, a standard issue .357 Magnum. It's a heavy piece of iron, designed to stop a charging bear in its tracks. Staring at the shifting mass of shadows suspended 80 feet in the air outside my window, the gun felt like a plastic toy. Dispatch, listen to me very carefully. If you don't drop those steel shutters right now, I'm putting a hollow point through this radio console and dropping the entire communications grid. Do it!
Warning, do not discharge a firearm. The entity is highly sensitive to sudden shifts in barometric pressure. If you break the glass, the perimeter will fail. The observation test will conclude. You will be consumed.
I kept the gun raised. The shadows outside the window stopped shifting. The swirling fog seemed to freeze in place. Slowly, a single appendage pressed out of the mist and flattened itself against the reinforced exterior glass. It was a hand, but it was entirely black, slick like oil. The fingers were impossibly long, spreading out across the pane like spider legs, feeling the vibrations of the klaxon siren hitting the glass. It was less than 3 feet from my face.
Tower 7. The entity is reading your elevated cortisol levels. It perceives you as prey. Please remove your jacket. We need to establish how long it takes for your core temperature to drop once it initiates the freezing cycle.
I didn't take off my jacket. I didn't say a word. I stared at the impossibly long, slick fingers pressed against the outside of the glass. The pane was already beginning to frost over, thick, fractal patterns of ice spiderwebbing outward from wherever the black fingertips touched. The temperature in the tower plummeted. I could see my own breath pluming in the air. The radio hissed again, clinical and completely devoid of human empathy.
Tower 7. Non-compliance noted. Be advised the glass will reach critical thermal stress in approximately 40 seconds. Once the perimeter shatters, remain seated. Your vital data is still actively transmitting.
My vital data. They didn't care if I died. They just wanted to record the exact telemetry of how it happened. I lowered the pistol. Dispatch was right about one thing. If I fired the gun, the sound wave and the pressure shift would shatter the freezing glass instantly. I couldn't fight the thing outside, but I could fight the thing keeping me trapped in here with it. I holstered the gun and turned my back on the window. I stepped over to the emergency supply locker mounted on the interior wall. I wrenched the metal handle down, popped the door, and pulled out the heavy, red, carbon steel fire axe. I didn't look back at the glass. The ice was creeping across the entire eastern wall now, groaning and popping under the sheer thermal stress of whatever that entity was. I walked straight to the center console. The green light on the VHF radio blinked steadily, maintaining the hardline connection to regional control. Dispatch had said the lockdown override was initiated remotely. That meant the mechanical dead drops for the heavy steel storm shutters were being held open by an electronic signal. An electronic signal coming through the hardline. I raised the fire axe over my head.
Tower 7. Desist immediately. Destruction of federal property will result in immediate termination of your contract and...
I brought the carbon steel blade down as hard as I could, burying it dead center into the radio console. Plastic shattered, wires severed. The green light died instantly. I ripped the axe out and swung again, driving the blade directly into the heavy breaker box beneath the desk, severing the main power feed to the tower. The klaxon siren died mid-wail. The lights blew out. The entire tower was plunged into absolute, pitch-black silence. Without the electronic override holding them back, the heavy mechanical winch gears above the windows released. All 4 half-inch steel storm shutters dropped like guillotines. They slammed into the floor brackets with a concussive, bone-rattling boom that shook the entire tower. I stood in the dark, my chest heaving. The freezing air in the cabin immediately stabilized. The groaning of the stressed glass stopped. The entity was locked on the outside of half an inch of reinforced steel. I didn't open the shutters until 8 o'clock the next morning. When I finally threw the manual crank and raised the steel plates, the blinding morning sun poured into the cabin. The fog was completely gone. The forest stretched out for miles, green and quiet, totally undisturbed. I checked the glass on the east-facing window. It hadn't shattered, but right where that massive, oily hand had pressed against the pane, the glass wasn't frozen anymore. It was permanently warped, melted into the shape of a massive, multi-jointed handprint, like someone had pressed a hot iron against plastic. I packed my bag. I didn't radio for a relief chopper, mostly because the radio was in pieces on the floor, but also because I knew whoever was on the other end of that line wasn't coming to help me. I hiked the 3 days back to the logging road, drove into town, and resigned my commission. I told them I wanted a quieter life. That was 10 years ago. I thought leaving the service meant leaving the anomalies behind. I thought whatever organization was observing these things was strictly a government problem. But after that weather radio started talking to me on my front porch, I realized how wrong I was. The rules haven't changed. They're just broadcasting on a different frequency now. I closed the green logbook, locked it back in the steel drawer under my workbench, and pocketed the key. I do what I do now because somebody has to keep a record of the things they don't want us to see. Somebody has to warn the people who live out here. If you made it to the end of the logbook, drop override in the comments so I know you broke the rules and survived the test. And let me ask you this. What would you do if you realized the people giving you instructions to survive weren't trying to save you, but were just holding the clipboard while you died? At what point do you stop following procedure and swing the axe? If you want more stories from Lantern Bend in the deep woods, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. There are more field logs in that drawer, and I think it's time I started sharing them. Stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.